Hey, welcome to the Sparks by Ignium podcast. I'm Phil Rose. I'm the host of the show. And today I'm delighted to welcome me to the show. Normally, it's me talking to other guests, learning from them, sharing their ideas, and bringing content that we believe our listeners can benefit from. When we talk to our guests, we're aiming to really develop a conversation. And what made me think about going on today to do a monologue rather than a dialogue with someone else was very much I was listening to a podcast with Dan Sullivan. Many of you know that I'm part of Dan Sullivan's Strategic Coach Network. I was introduced to Strategic Coach many years ago and actually only joined recently. So I've been reading Dan's books for some time. So thank you, Dan Sullivan. Dan's written some interesting books, which I love, and I'll talk some more about those in the future. But specifically, I want to mention The Gap and the Gain as we go through here. One of the things about the gap and the gain I notice, and I see this coming up for my clients, is where people fall into that gap thinking they're not enough, thinking they've not achieved enough in their lives, or they've not done what they expected to do. And the reason I wanted to go on to do this monologue today was to think about what is it that I'm bringing to the party when I talk to my guests? Because I mentioned before that I talk to a lot of guests and I have great conversations with them. But one thing I realize is that in those conversations, it's me developing a conversation. And I said that I was listening to Dan doing his podcast. He does a number of different podcasts. Anyone who is part of Strategic Coach will also be aware of what Dan does, and you'll hear the great words that he has from some amazing guests. And I think for me, what I really want to bring is the fact that podcasting is about this dialogue, this communication. So even though it's me having a monologue here, what I'd like it to be is a dialogue with you, the listener, for you to hear what you want to hear. And I always say hear what you want to hear because you'll only hear what you want to hear. And the same way you'll only see what you want to see. We are all blinded by what we know. The brain is amazing. It deletes, it distorts, and it changes the way we see things because deletion and distortion are two of the key things that we bring into our world around us in what we do. And when I think about that, we delete what we don't want to hear. We distort the facts because actually from our perspective, what we actually are here to do is to understand things the way they fit into our mental map of the world. And I think that's one of the key things when I think about what Dan was saying on his podcast about dialogue. So for me, when I'm talking now, I'd love you to listen into what you hear. I'd love you to take note. And I'd love you to send me comments on what you think you hear as well. Because often when I'm talking to clients, often in a coaching relationship or in a team relationship, it's very much about solving the problems for which they bring to the table. And they bring things which I may have an answer to. But there's no point me giving them my answer directly because they won't hear it. Because what works for me may not work for them. And I think one of the key elements of coaching is around this enabling people to think for themselves, enabling them to come up with their own answers. Because often it's their answer is what they're looking for. It's not my answer. In fact, I say often, it's always their answer they're looking for. It's the same as when you're selling anything to anybody or developing anything for somebody, you actually need to be able to promote what you're talking about at some stage, but maybe that's not the key thing the person wants to buy. Hey, listen up. Maybe actually you need to ask some great questions because the people only buy what they want to buy. They don't buy what you're selling. They buy the solution that you're providing and how to solve the problem for them. So I think in this world of dialogue, my view is the podcast is about dialogue. Although I'm having a dialogue with my guests and I'm having a monologue now with you, the listener, what I actually see is that we are having a dialogue because there's a chance to interact. And Sassy, who puts this great podcast together, has introduced us recently to the world of Spotify questions, where people can interact with the show. So if you are listening to this on Spotify, please look at your screen now and you'll be able to see the questions that are popping up. Send us your answers, send us your thoughts, because that's the way you can interact. So it becomes more of a dialogue even. And I think that's the key thing. I think the other thing about podcasting, which I love, is that the conversations are just that, a conversation. It is not an interview. And for any guest who's been on the show, I always have that conversation up front. I talk to them about the fact that I'm not an interviewer. What I am is somebody who asks questions because I'm a coach. I ask questions also because I'm a human being and just interested. So for me, that curiosity is sparked and that builds a dialogue, that builds a conversation. And I never know where the conversation is going to go from 1 minute to the next because we're following the flow of the energy. And I think that's critical to the way the dialogue works to solve problems. So I think in coaching questions, when I'm talking to a coachee, they come to the table with an issue that they want solved. And I simply ask them questions. I ask them, a number of questions to help them get to the root of what's going on for them. And I think that's the key to these things. And when we're having conversations, whether you're in a selling situation, or whether you're in a buying situation, or whether you're in a coaching situation, or whether you're just working with your teams, it's about asking questions. I hear so many podcasters just talking. I hear so many radio show presenters just talking. And to me, you need to listen as well. We all need to be out there listening more, talking less. Hey, why do I say that? Because often a lot of people say, hey, you just need a good talking to. Or maybe that was just my upbringing. But actually, the key is you don't. You need a good listening to. And I think that's the key to some of these points around podcasts. We can sit and listen. And I sit and listen to the guests we have on the show to hear what they're saying. But the point is, I need to understand where they're coming from. And that's what coaching is all about. It's about getting to the root of the issue, to help them understand. I've helped them understand what's going on for them, because actually at the end of the day, coaching is about solving a problem for somebody else, or helping somebody see a different side of things by asking questions. Sometimes I'll throw something in to say, hey, mate, try this onto the side. This is what I'm noticing. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm sensing. But if that's not their answer, hey, they can come back and say, hey, that doesn't apply to me. And that's the key. So where am I going with this? I think that I'm going is it's about that dialogue piece. So even though I'm monologuing here, talking to myself, what I'd love you to pick up on is how we can build a dialogue. How what we do as podcasters is really to send out communication. We're broadcasting this in some way so people can hear what we're saying. They can listen to it, whether you're in the car, in the gym, out walking the dog. If you haven't got a dog, maybe just out walking. Maybe you're at home, maybe you're lying in bed. I don't know where you are, but either way, you might be listening to this at the moment. But I always urge you to think about, how can you do something with the conversation? How can you do something with the actions, the thoughts? I know when I listen to books on Audible, I'll often stop the Audible show and just make a note of things I'm hearing. I listen to lots of books, whether I'm in the gym or often on my spin bike in the morning. Not that I spin every day, but I spin a couple of times a week. So I listen to things then to try and give me some way of getting back to the thoughts I had while I was listening to the show. And I think this is the key point around when we're talking with our teams as well. In any team situation, I often hear people struggling with, how do I get the message across to these individuals? How do I get the message across to those people? I was listening to one of Patrick Lencioni's podcasts this morning, and he was talking about the dissenter in the room. And what he meant by that is, and he was talking from a business perspective and also a not-for-profit perspective, where you sometimes have dissenters in the room. You might be going about a change program. You might be going about a development program. You might be just working in a business. And there might be somebody in there who just doesn't buy into it. And one of the tools we use, and I mentioned Lencioni because we use Patrick Lencioni's books and we reference them all the time. If I look at my bookshelf, I've got a number of his books staring out at me over there, from 5 Dysfunctions through to Getting Naked, which is an interesting take on things as well, because I think that thing as a consultant and a coach, when you're in front of the room, the fact that you are up there and you've got to be vulnerable, I think is really key. And I think as a CEO, I come back to this point just now about asking questions. Sometimes we need to ask the questions, and that presupposes we just don't know the answers. So when we are in a team and we have the dissenters in the room, actually it's about asking, well, where are you? Where are you on the page? This is where we're looking to go to. And what Lencioni talks about is, of course, obviously building 5 dysfunctions up in terms of building up that trust. Trust so you can understand each other, and not just understand where you are at work in your professional life, and understand where you're coming from, where you are in your personal life as well. So when we think about opening up the room, it's about getting to know each other, because we are all at work for a large proportion of our time, and we want it to be a good place to be. We want to bring our A team players to work, and I as an individual want to be in that A team, and therefore I have to up my game. Because if everyone is up in their game, I've got to work harder as well, and that's the key. But when we get the dissenter in the room, the dissenter is often the one who's just going to hold things back, and it only takes one dissenter to unravel the whole of a change program, to unravel any of the coaching work that we might do as coaches. Because actually, if the CEO can't start delivering the message in a clear way without it being upset by somebody in that room, they're never going to get the full room on their side. And part of this is about having that conversation with that individual to say, okay, let's understand where you're coming from. This is where we're looking at taking the business, but where are you coming from as an individual? What's the thing that's holding you back from jumping on the wagon of where we're going? Because as Jim Collins always says, We want people willingly on the bus. We want them in the right seats with the right skills going in the right direction. But to start with, you've got to get them on the bus. And that's about understanding where the dissenter's coming from. Sometimes those dissenters just might not be heard. And if you have a quieter member in the room, they can also be the most dangerous when it comes to actually moving things forwards. Because often we find that it's the quiet ones who don't say anything, just nodding away, who actually unravel things behind the scenes, because they're the ones who go out of the meeting with some commitments but knew nothing with them. So my view is you need to head up that dialogue to start with. Have that conversations with those dissenters in the room to understand what's on it, what's coming on for them. When I first started into the coaching world, which was back in 2004, I had previously worked at Rolls-Royce, and I worked with an amazing coach at that time, and she was part of the consulting team at A.T. Kearney. And she worked on a number of areas which around helping us improve the business. But one of the key things she talked about was helping people understand, which we all know now, what's in it for me and what's against my interest. Because actually, for every change program, we always know we have the whammies and the whiffums. And we need to understand, let's just, from our stakeholders' point of view, what's against their interest? Why aren't they going to buy into this? But equally, why should they buy into it? What's the thing? What's the thing that's in it for them? And with these dissenters, we need to help them understand, and they help us understand where are they coming from. Because maybe they've got some really valid points. Maybe there's a fear. In fact, I say maybe. There's often a fear sitting behind it. There's a fear that if they change or if they can't change, what's going to be the implications for them. So we have to, as leaders, sit down with these people and just understand, where are you coming from? Because in my eyes, you might look like a dissenter. You might be looking at the one who's upsetting what we're trying to do. But realistically, you might have some valid points. So I'd urge you to think about, okay, what are the things that I can do as an individual to bring those dissenters on board and have that dialogue with people? Because often in a change program, if we're just running a monologue of this is where I'm going, you're on the bus or not, maybe you're missing out on some key nuggets that those individuals in the room can also bring to it. So I'd urge you, if you're listening to this and you are going through a change program, if you're going through a coaching program, just to ask the other questions. Who else in your team do you need to work with to get them on board? Because actually, once you can build that, you might find that they're the biggest ally in the team as well. And often that's the case. So when Lencioni talks about building trust around the key commitments, you can then start having open that conflict box up and have conversations with individuals, which maybe have been hidden before. So I think this is a key thing for most people. Build up that dialogue. So I come back to Dan Sullivan, which I mentioned at the beginning. What spurred me on to think about now is I was listening to Dan on his podcast talking about podcasting and that dialogue versus the monologue, and how we can really put a message out there and how podcasting will change. What we're really seeing is that let's build that communication with us. And I mentioned Dan's book, Gap and Gain. I think often when you're thinking about moving things forward, one thing I love about the Gap and the Gain book is that often we plan out where we're going, we set our goals on something, and then when we don't quite achieve it, we then look back and say, oh, we haven't done well, we've not got as far as we want. And that's falling into the gap. And often the dissenters in the room are concerned, they're fearful of not achieving something. Maybe there's some other things coming up for them. Maybe there's things that in the past they've had issues with that they just haven't been able to move forwards. And they often fall into that gap. Whereas what Dan says quite eloquently is, let's look at the gain. Where have you got to? If we're trying to get 100 meters and we only got 99, think about the 99 we've achieved rather than the 1 meter we haven't. I was talking to someone recently about their daughter, and their daughter had done some work on one of their exams, and they'd got an amazing result, but they beat themselves up because of the scores they didn't get. Well, how could they have improved? Rather than saying, hey, look, I did really well in the first place. So I'd urge you to think, okay, where am I falling into? I'm in the gap or I'm in the gain, as Dan Sullivan would say. What I would also say is think about this dialogue piece as well, because we as individuals can help other people within our teams, within our world, within our community, look at where they are. So the dissenters, maybe they're falling into the gap. Maybe they're concerned. Maybe they feel they don't match up with where they should be. And they're fearful of not being able to keep up with the younger generation, maybe, or the other people in the office. So what can we do to help them? And at the end of the day, help is the key to this. And that's where I think coaching comes in. And coaching becomes that dialogue where we as coaches can really help and support people build their lives by asking great questions, by understanding what's beneath the surface. Because we all know that there's always something else going on. The problem the prospect brings is never the real real problem, as Marcus Kauke used to say when I joined my first Sandler training course. So I always think about that again. The problem the prospect brings is never the real problem. You have to scratch beneath the surface to find out what's really going on for them. And that's the same with the dissenter in the corner. If we're just broadcasting to them, you're just going to put them off. So we need to work on it. How do we help them fall into the gain rather than stepping into the gap? Think what they can be doing. So look, this is very much me just talking about some of the things that I'm seeing around with regard to that dialogue, monologue, coaching, questions that I start to ask myself and I ask the clients we work with. I hope this has been useful. If you can engage on Spotify, please do so, because I think some great communication there to build the podcast into more of a dialogue. This podcast itself, I'm recording now from the office in May in 2024. And I'm hoping that we can just touch a few people's lives with regard to how do we spark your imagination, spark your creativity, spark your drive to build your business. Because as a coach, I want to help you scale not just your business, but also your life. How can we do more with what you've got so you can get home to see your friends, family, pets, community, whatever it might be, and also have fun with it as well. And often it's by getting beneath those questions that are stopping you that you can move forward. And that leads me on to my final point. I wonder when the dissenter in the room is actually you, when you set yourself a goal to do something, when you set yourself a challenge, but actually there's a little nag in your voice saying, I can't do that. I couldn't do that. But you're just not listening to it. So we often think in a change situation in a business, there's always a dissenter sitting in the room who just derails things. And that's the person we need to deal with. But what if it's you? What if you are that dissenter? What if you're the dissenter subconsciously thinking, no, we can't do that? So you're putting the beliefs out there, but you're not understanding what really can be done. So I think from my perspective, I just urge you to ask yourself those questions. And if your coach isn't asking the right questions, think about what questions you could be asking. What's really going on for me? Really? Am I really fine? Or am I the one that's causing the problems? Sometimes we can coach ourselves, but often it's better to have that person walking alongside us who can also ask us questions. Because I think when you do ask those other questions yourself, if you let yourself off the hook, that's your point. But sometimes you don't need to let yourself off the hook. And that's where real coaching comes in, to ask those questions that you know the answers to. So think about this. Think about the dialogue. Think about the dialogue you're having in your head right now. Think about your thinking about what's going on. Why is Phil telling me these things? Why am I hearing this? So as I said before, we only hear what we want to hear. We only see what we want to see. Because actually, from our perspective, remember what I said about the way the brain works. We have an amazing ability to delete what we don't want to hear, to distort the reality around things. And I think from our perspective, we have that meaning making. We come up with our own reasons for things, which is why I think actually sometimes maybe we're that dissenter in the room when we are the ones who are stopping things moving forward, when we're holding ourselves back, when we're thinking, I'm not good enough, I can't do these things. And we're falling into that gap mentality that I mentioned earlier from Dan Sullivan. Whereas actually from our perspective, we need to think further. Think about, okay, what can I do to really move myself forwards? What can I do to get to that next level? Where can I move it forwards? And I think that's one of the key things I've always worked on in my life, is around being clear about where am I? My daughter called me out on something the other day, and I was a bit shocked, and I had to go and reflect on it. I've always thought of myself as very much a growth-minded person. I've always gone out, when I achieved my Guinness World Record, it was about me pushing myself forwards in a sporting place. But she called me out and said, Dad, I think you've got a fixed mindset in some areas. And I had to reflect on this. And I thought, my gosh, how does my 18-year-old know this? And I realized, she does know this because she's the one who hears me talking in the home. I'm hoping I've given her a growth mindset attitude to things, that she can go out and do what she wants to do. She can go and achieve things. But when she called me on that, I thought, okay, what's she hearing that I haven't heard myself hearing? Where's my subconscious been taking me? And I wondered actually what's going on. And I realized for me, I've been blaming over the years other people for me not getting further, or I've been looking at things in a different way. So I'm now working actively to challenge my own mindset when I've been that dissenter in the room. And I'm thinking about the dialogue I've been having with myself subconsciously sometimes that's stopped me moving forward, that's prevented me becoming the best version of myself, or doubting my abilities. And I think actually when I get clear on that and listen to that feedback, maybe I am holding myself back in certain ways. So I am the dissenter in my own room, and I need to have a serious conversation with myself about what do I need to be doing? Where do I need to step up? How can I change my mindset to become more growth-minded rather than fixed-minded? And where do I fall into the gap rather than gain? So a number of things there. I'd love you to reflect on those: the gap and the gain, the dissenter in the room, the monologue we're having, and just wonder, where's that showing up for you? Where are you holding yourself back? Where are you the dissenter in the room? Where are you that's not putting across that real message? And when are you blaming yourself for not achieving things when actually you're the one who's actually stopping yourself in the first place? Let me know your thoughts. Let me know where we're going with this. I hope this makes sense. Maybe there's some content here that's just resonating for you a little bit. If it isn't, hey, not for you. Don't worry. But I'd love you to pass this on to people who might be able to benefit from it. And if you need help, coaching, support, just give me a call. It's Phil at igniumconsult.com. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show. I look forward to speaking to you all next time.